Hello. It's me. How are you? Don't care, let's start. After a year and a half of some of the heaviest fighting Europe had seen since World War II, the Chechens had done it. They had realised the dream of independence. Or, as it turned out, the nightmare. The now President Maskhadov sought to normalise Chechnya, but when your Wikipedia entry would say partially recognised state, you're not off to a good start. The economy? Non-existent. Jobs? There are none. Centralisation? Very funny. The field commanders and their militias would not stand down, they just weren't interested, and so Basayev and others became warlords. The militia structure was now backfiring, and so too would the call for jihad. Islamist fighters started converting the Chechen youth to their radical Wahhabist branch of Islam, not with convincing sermons, but with Saudi money. Religious extremism became rife in the Republic. In fact, if it wasn't political or religious violence, it was just straight up crime. Kidnappings and ransoms became common, and if not that, then a cross-border raid would fill militant pockets instead. President Maskhadov, the parliament, and the Republic wielded no power in Chechnya. Power came only from the end of a gun, and those happy to use them were the warlords. By the time warlords ran districts and Sharia law was enforced on the people, the chief mufti Ahmed Kadyrov, and many others for that matter, were disillusioned with this independence. Soon, the Russian government had Chechens on their side. That's not to say Russia was prospering. It had its own fair share of problems. In 1999, Yeltsin was coming to the end of his presidency. His wish for a democracy had only seen the state become corrupt, disgraced, and defeated. Yeltsin was sick and aging, and the new generation had to take over. The government of Russia was however against Yeltsin and any successor he may offer. Soviet revanchism was growing and growing, nostalgia for the Union blinded many, and the Federation was in dire straits. It was only by betraying the values of a free democracy could Russia survive. Vladimir Putin was planned to be Yeltsin's successor for the 2000 election, and the man was not going to relive Yeltsin's mistakes. He'd build an autocratic, centralized state with himself, the president, the strongman of Russia. His job would not be easy. To bring together the presidency, the government, and the people could seem a Herculean task, but answering the Chechen question could have done just that. Shamil Basayev and commander of the Mujahideen in Chechnya, Ibn al-Khattab, would invade the neighbouring Republic of Dagestan in late 1999. Autonomous Republic, that is. Autonomous Republic of Russia. They invaded Russia. The Russian counterattack was swift and saw extensive use of their new go-to tactic, indiscriminate bombardment. It would only be a month before the Islamist militants had been driven out of Dagestan and back into Chechnya. It was in that month though a series of apartment bombings rung out across Russia, killing almost 300 people. It was quickly pinned on the Chechens, though some think it was an inside job. Though those some don't have any hard evidence. Putin and his party's pro-war stance was now popular coming into the 1999 parliamentary elections. Bombs fell on Chechnya, Maskhadov's rule was deemed illegitimate, and Putin stated, "There is no border with Chechnya." It was very, very clear what was going on. It was war. A relentless air campaign over Chechnya had already caused many civilians to flee. Over a quarter of the population was seeking refuge in Russia or elsewhere. It was only in October did land forces begin to finally arrive in Chechnya. They engaged a slow and methodical march from the north to the south. Bombing runs, artillery barrages, and tank fire would blaze their trail to Grozny. By late November, the capital was surrounded, and December would see yet another Battle of Grozny. Heavy bombardment was once again the key to success, and the infantry acted only as a glorified mop. By the end of January 2000, the bulk of the militants had abandoned the city, and federal forces took Grozny, or, as it was now, the most destroyed city on Earth. That's not to say it was over and done like that. Heavy Russian casualties were apparent, but what mattered most in this new war was that the other side was getting it worse. The side getting the very worst of it though was civilians, and as you can imagine, the international community was having none of it. But as it stood, the separatists were once again in the mountains, and Russia still had many bombs they wished to send their way. 2000 was spent mostly just hitting any clusters of fighters they could find. If they wanted to clear them out entirely, well, that would take decades. In May, the early formations of an exit plan were already being put in place. Ahmed Kadyrov was to be installed as the head of a pro-Moscow administration. With Kadyrov's loyalty, Putin hoped to see him bring the rest of the Chechens into line. But Kadyrov was not the smooth-talking, diplomatic friend of the people type. His control came from his militia. Power through fear. He was a Chechen who knew what Chechens responded to, because as we know, it takes a Caucasian to beat a Caucasian. As 2000 came to a close, the separatists had been pushed out of the populated centres, and Russia claimed control of the most important asset of the war, the people. Heavy fighting was over, but the war certainly wasn't. The insurgency continued to haunt Chechens and shock Russians. This war had become very different from the first one, and when the September 11th attacks hit the US, Putin was able to highlight his war as a counter to Islamic terrorism, and the international community took on a more understanding tone. Admittedly, he had some justification to call those militants terrorists. 2002 saw Basayev attempting Bujanovsk Lightning to strike twice, as his men took over a Moscow theatre and held 800 hostages. His demand was simple, an unconditional withdrawal of Russian troops from Chechnya. Putin was not going to cave into threats though. The gas was pumped into the theatre, knocking out everyone inside, allowing Spetsnaz to simply enter and kill all insurgents. The gas compound, however, also killed 133 hostages. The heavy-handed approach had sent a clear message to Basayev. There would be no compromise at any cost. The next year, a new Chechen Republic would come together. Kadyrov was formally elected president after he had blocked and scared away competition. It was now his job to lead, and most importantly, control the republic, the autonomous republic of the Russian Federation. Resistance to the new president was disorganized, yet still highly volatile. At one extreme you had Basayev's jihadists, and at the other, Masharov's more secular rebels. And between, many different militias, with many different leaders. After Moscow Theatre, there were more terrorist attacks, mostly under Basayev's instruction. 2004 would see this stepped up. In May, an explosion in a Grozny stadium killed 30 people, including Kadyrov. Power transferred to his son Ramzan Kadyrov, who has officially stood as president since 2007. September 2004 would contain the apogee of Basayev's terror attacks. The Beslan massacre saw 34 insurgents take 1,100 hostages at a school, mostly women and children. After 3 tortuous days where an intricate network of bombs and human shields had been set up, and the hostages without food, and later water or toilets, the federal forces acted. Over 380 people would die in the storming of the school. It was a tragedy, but it wasn't a defeat. Basayev was the most wanted man in Russia, and the Chechen cause had been perverted beyond repair. The terror attacks, the killings, the kidnappings, and the radicalism was all the public could see now. Russia's own crimes now seemed trivial. The original dream of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria died with Maskhadov in 2005, when he was killed by the FSB. And for Basayev, his end would come in 2006, not at the hands of an elaborate and perfectly planned out and executed FSB assassination, but when a mine was mishandled in his presence and his own bombs literally blew up in his face. The war would not share Basayev's fate. It didn't go out with a bang, but with a whimper. Responsibility for combating the insurgency was slowly transferred from Russian troops to Kadyrov's, and as long as it was a Chechen problem, it wouldn't be a Russian one. Billions of dollars were also funneled into the Republic to turn Grozny from a ruin to a lavish regional capital. The speed and ambition of the construction was admirable, but could a few skyscrapers truly win over the people? The Second Chechen War formally ended on the 16th of April 2009, when Ramzan Kadyrov and Putin's political tag team partner, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, officially ended Russian counterterrorism operations inside Chechnya. A low-level insurgency continues in the area, but fact of the matter is the militants are nowhere near strong enough to concern Russia, and Russia is nowhere near as weak as they once were. Chechnya is now a republic of concession and oppression. It's very much changed from the 80s. Chechen culture and its Islamic faith is embraced fully and openly. Chechen people are unmistakably Chechen, not Russian, don't call them that. But the Kadyrov government is corrupt, human rights violations are no stranger to them, and if it's not the government persecuting you, it's the insurgencies or criminals instead. Those kidnappings still can turn a serious profit. What earns the most serious profit in Chechnya though is their oil. And that is why Russia bothered in the first place, and it's that what makes Putin tolerate Kadyrov and the entire republic today. Their loyalty means money, and so both Russian and Chechen crimes become permissible for the end goal. Wait a minute, I don't feel happy at all, that was shit. Here I am, once again, at everybody's favourite part of the episode where I say the names David Kendall, Thomas Curley, Ermi Arez, and you know the one. Yeah, that one? Yeah. Anal Scrubs. Oh, and thanks to the other patrons.